In this video, we're going to practice combining shapes, and by the end of the video, you will have created something like this, a blacksmithing anvil, if you follow along. First, though, we're going to get going with a couple of basic shape combining exercises. So what I'm doing here is I'm drawing 3 boxes. Of course, I get to practice my parallel lines when I'm doing this, but I'm trying to make boxes that are roughly this size, a little bit longer than they are tall. Then at each of these corners, I'm going to attempt to draw a circle centered around the corner of that shape. Now I'm going to do this for the first box, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these circles to divide the box. And you can see here in the first one that I'm doing, I'm removing the circle. And in the second one, I'm adding the circle. In the next one, I'm going to remove the circle, and so on. Now in each of these cases, I'm trying to have the circle meet the edge of the box at a perpendicular intersection. I'm trying to do this just so I can get myself to deliberately create a shape and not simply make random shapes. Now what I'm doing in the second box is I've moved the circles inward, and I'm trying to have the outside edge of the circle meet tangent to the wall, the side wall of the box. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the circle to remove. The first circle I'm removing, the second circle I'm adding, third circle I'm removing. And this is giving me the chance to try to divide my shapes and have some deliberate actions like meeting in a tangent and meeting normal to the edges. Here now I've moved my circles inward, and now I guess you could imagine them overlapping right at the center, and I use them both to intersect. Now what I'm going to do is draw a box on the inside of this, simply so that I can get myself to imagine dividing these shapes by other shapes. Now this box that's being drawn in the middle is going to be a void space. It's going to be a hole, a square hole. And we're going to make that obvious by practicing some shading. And I want to do this shading here because it forces me to think about what I'm doing. And you can see right here, I kind of forgot that there was this circle protrusion coming off the edge. So I need to go back and clean that up off the edge. Now, one of the things that's happening here is I'm trying to make my parallel lines continue as if they went through this square hole. So I need to think about that and try to get the same kind of spacing, try to line it up the best that I can. Of course, when I do this, when I put in this shading, it's going to make that shape stick off of the page just a little bit better. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Of course, when I do this, I get to practice my parallel lines, which is good, but mostly what I'm practicing is the idea of dividing this space by the square that's in the middle, the square hole, but also how the circles are interacting with the edges. Now, what someone would actually do with these shapes, these are just useless shapes, but they are a way of getting us to think about how the shapes intersect each other. And I'm going to do the last one here. I'm going to go a little bit faster, try to not take too much time on the practice. But I can tell I'm getting a little bit sloppy here, and that's troubling me, and it's gonna cause some trouble. See, there we go. But I'm moving on because I'm willing to accept that during my practice, things aren't going to be perfect. Here I am trying to line up, just kind of redefine that inside box, sharpen it up just a bit, and that's basically what we want to do there, is just practice dividing up shapes. All right, so now we're going to go on to a more complex part. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to try to make a blacksmithing anvil. And the reason why I want to do a blacksmithing anvil is because the anvil is filled with so many interesting shapes that are we could think of as coming from our primitives, our basic shapes. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating an overall outside shape. I don't really like that line, so I'm trying to straighten that out a little bit. Our outside shape of the anvil. So I'm creating a cuboid or whatever we would call this thing. I'm trying to make it about twice as tall as it is wide. Okay, and I'm doing this in perspective view. You should follow along. Try to do this if you can. Pause the thing if you need to. Now, I want to divide the anvil in half right down the center. Now, the base of an anvil takes up about a third of the bottom. So I've drawn some lines to help me know what's going on there. And now what I'm trying to do is get the bottom front corner of my anvil. So I'm just taking my cuboid, and just trying to break it up into various shapes. Now I'm giving the base a little bit of thickness, and this is my front face of my base. Now I'm just trying to establish this, get this kind of, try to establish the basic shapes here. I'm not going to try to draw the back of it because there's going to be other parts of the anvil that come out there. Now, at the same location as the front of the base, there is a part of an anvil that steps down from the main face to a smaller shelf. And so I'm drawing that here, which is in essence allowing me to kind of divide up my shape. I'm going to imagine these surfaces to still be parallel to each other, so they're both flat kind of in terms of space. Some of my perspective view isn't looking super great right there, but I'm going to have to just go with it. Now, there's a horn on an anvil that comes off to the front, and I need to start establishing where that's going to be. So I'm going to divide the side of my anvil, and that's going to help me to know where the horn's going to begin in the front and how things are going to be in the back. But here at the bottom, let me put in some curvature down where the legs are. So I'm placing these circles symmetrically about the center. And then I'm going to use these circles simply as a curvature to get down to the bottom. I'm going to try to basically do this same thing on both sides. I'm using the circle to help me understand what the base of the anvil might look like. Now, it's hard to tell whether what dimension that's in, but at least those are my guiding lines. Now I'm taking the back of the anvil, which might otherwise be thought of as constant thickness, but I'm going to thin it out near the back. So I'm basically taking a wedge out of the back of the anvil. I'm going to almost do the same kind of shape in the front. But here, where we have the horn, this is probably the hardest part of creating the anvil, because the horn, you might think that it would come out directly out of this ellipse, which might have some sort of axis, trying to draw an axis through the center of the ellipse outward. But actually what happens with an anvil is that the horn tilts upward. And so I need to get a new axis, and that axis is the one that I just drew there. And now I need to attempt the hardest part, which is to get a set of concentric ovals. And my concentric ovals need to follow the line that's going up, getting smaller and smaller. Now, I can take the outside shape of these ovals, and these start to define what the horn looks like. If you're having a hard time envisioning what I mean by this horn, you might look up an anvil on the internet just to see what it looks like. The top of the tapered horn stays horizontal. That's what I'm trying to draw here, though not doing a terribly great job. So what I do now is I want to strengthen up the notion of the curvature that's on the horn. So I'm kind of going back over my construction ellipses. Here I am just strengthening up the tip just a little bit. All right, so now that I have this, I can start to get that transition into into the, the skirt part. I think it's called the skirt on a blacksmithing anvil, but the skirt part of the anvil kind of shaped up. And I can get the back piece, the back of that skirt, now defined. And it's starting to look like an anvil. Up here, there is a thing called the hardy hole. And the hardy hole is a square that shows up in the back. And then also in a blacksmithing anvil, you have a thing called a pritchel hole, which is to the rear and behind the hardy hole. So I've just drawn that in there. Now for this skirt, we can start to give it just a little bit of dimension and give it the sense that it curves inward, which we can do with some sort of contour line. Didn't do a great job on that. We could do some sort of contour line. Also, I get a contour line on the center there. This starts to give it just a little bit of depth. Now, I'm going to try to shade a little bit of this, not a lot of it, but a little bit of it. This part is, underneath the horn. So I'm going to just shade that up a bit, especially to get rid of some of my mistakes. Also, I want to get more of a three-dimensional view going on with this horn. So I'm going to choose some spot on the horn that I think basically represents the horizontal edge of the horn and just kind of shade it a bit and shade some other parts. And if I want the edge of this anvil to feel like it's sticking out a bit and the skirt goes inward, I need to just shade just a little bit underneath it. Now I'm going to just kind of strengthen up the edges a little bit. I have a lot of construction lines here that I'm not terribly happy about, but my construction lines will fade a little bit more into the background when I spend some time strengthening up the edges. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to strengthen up the outer edge the most, and I'm going to use a fine tip Sharpie for this. I love these pens. This particular one, I can tell, is not working terribly well. So in order to make things dark enough, I kind of have to go over this multiple times, which I wish I did not have to do, because it results in lines that are not quite as crisp as they could be. So I'm going all the way around the edges here, and I'm going around the edges just to get this anvil to basically pop off the page. And I just want to go over again one more time why I think that drawing anvils are good. Drawing anvils are good because they are a bunch of basic shapes just put together. We have this overall cuboid that we start with. Then we imagine a sort of flat regions of the anvil. We imagine curved regions of the anvil. We get to think about steps, and we get to think about how the whole thing kind of comes together. So I think that, it doesn't matter so much if this looks like a real anvil, but what matters is that I'm learning to divide shapes by other shapes. And that's what this anvil is all about.